make it clear.
Order. I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen Aid, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers, here's an author, a columnist and political commentator, the only voice of reason at the Truth newspaper, blogger Chris Trotter, and here's the Associate Professor of the School of Communication Studies at AUT, fresh from America where he was watching the US election, Dr. Wayne Hope. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, Issue 1, the Labour Party conference. Shearer says he's not worried about the knives, but what about the pitchforks? Issue 2, what should the world expect from an Obama win? Is 4 more years of increased drone strikes preferable to invading Iran? And in Issue 3, CPAG announces 363 beneficiaries with children have had their benefit cut under Paula Bennett. How does that help children in poverty? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with Issue 1. The Labour Party conference is being held in Auckland this weekend, and the only topic is David Shearer's leadership. Massive speculation on the blogs has led to attacks by Labour front benches that blogs are irrelevant. Chris, you shouldn't pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Should you pick a fight with blogs who post on the hour?
That's a very good new coinage, I think, there, Martin. I've been following the reaction to the blogosphere's growing consensus that Mr. Shearer should perhaps step aside for a more compelling leader of the Labour Party. Yep. And it strikes me, I mean, even someone as erudite as Gavin Ellis, who now lectures at the University of Auckland,
That's right.
Doesn't seem to yet have grasped the role that blogs now play,
That's right,
and the social media in general now plays in politics. And what I think they find most difficult to relinquish is the enormous power that a monopoly on a big printing press or a transmitting antenna gave you in terms of journalism and editorial influence. The idea that anybody can put their ideas out there, and if they're expressed well, and if they're on topic, as it were, talking about something that other people are talking about, they're going to get a big audience. Now, this is what blogs like The Standard are able to do now. They are able to intrude their voice, and particularly the voice of their commentators, into the general debate. Now, I think it was Eddie, was the pseudonym that he or she writes under, got something like 270 comments in a matter of hours to her original posting on Mr. Shearer. Now, most of those people, I would hazard a fairly substantial bet, are members of and probably activists in the Labour Party. So, whereas the newspapers, the radio stations, television networks would never have given those people the opportunity to have their say.
That's right.
Or Eddie, probably.
Yeah.
Now they are intruding their views into the discussion. And a sensible mainstream media accepts that, looks at it, reads it, absorbs it, and factors it into its own analysis. Telling bloggers that they have too much influence is music to their ears.
Is Labour attacking The Standard a bit like Republicans turning on Fox News? Is it that surreal? Is it that surreal?
Well, I don't know what they expected from The Standard. As Lynn Prentice, who manages that blog, has told people who visit it and read it regularly, until he's blue in the face, this is not an official Labour Party blog. Right? This is a left-leaning blog site with a stable of writers, some of whom use their own names, some of whom use pseudonyms. We are here to provide what I suspect he would hope was a constructive critique of Labour's performance. Now, I think The Standard is perfectly justified in drawing attention to the fact that Labour's performance this year has been woeful and the performance of its leader the most woeful.
Wayne, Shearer's defenders will point to Helen Clark's low polling before she went on to run New Zealand for 3 terms. Are the criticisms against Shearer fair?
Oh, it's not about the poll ratings, it's about his background. The extraordinary thing about Shearer compared to Clark and Gough and early leaders is all those earlier leaders had an understanding of New Zealand's political and economic history and an understanding of the history of the Labour Party. And to my way of thinking, Shearer doesn't actually have that. Coupled with, he wasn't even in New Zealand during the 1980s. So when one of the biggest decades in our contemporary history is unfolding with Rogernomics, privatisations and all of that, he's not even here. So he doesn't even understand that. So here you have somebody who's pretty much a blank slate as far as memory is concerned, trying to project a vision for the future. Well, in my view, amnesia and myopia are integrally related.
Do you think he's got a chance as leader? Do you think he's had his chance? He's had a year sort of bedded in. Does he need longer?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen at the party conference. What I've heard is not a lot. But the point is, he's only doing slightly well in the polls because of the difficulties the government is having, not because of anything proactive that he's done. What I would like to know on economic matters, what's his view of the Reserve Bank Act? What is his view of the high dollar? What is his view on what Brian Gould was saying in the Herald today about too much investment going into speculative housing and so on, rather than to other areas of the economy? Does he have a view on that? Would he continue on with public expenditure cuts, which is taking spending power out of the Wellington economy? And so it goes on. Does he have views on these matters?
Yeah.
Or is he economically illiterate as well as amnesiac?
What do you think made the Labour Party go with him as the leader? Is it just because they resented Cunliffe so much, or did they see in him someone who had a backstory who would appeal to the majority of New Zealanders?
Well, I think Chris has pointed this out in a number of his columns. What happens is that Helen Clark anoints Gough, and Gough anoints Shearer, and there's actually no democratic debate over political succession within the Labour Party itself.
Right.
So it's simple as that. And because there's been no democratic debate over Shearer's accession to the throne, it means that we've got all this angst in the party coming up. This debate should have been happening back then.
Chris, Josie Pagani will argue Labour needs to move to the centre to win, but when you break down the last 3 elections and where the votes went, Labour voters didn't move to national to vote, they just didn't vote. Cunliffe claims the reason is because Labour are just as neoliberal as national, and that a step to the left is required. Do you think that's correct?
Well, I think there was some shift to national from the Labour vote in both 2005 and 2008.
Yeah, there was
a small but
yep.
important number, the Waitakere man and woman, as I've
yep.
dubbed them. However, I think in 2011, you're absolutely right. I think there was a mass abstention. Most of the people who stayed away from the polling booths would have been Labour voters. And this suggests to me that Labour must direct its primary pitch to that vote, get them back on side, and then perhaps go chasing after the rats and mice, that have drifted away
right.
into the centre over the years, probably because they've got a whole lot wealthier and more comfortable.
Sure,
Seems to be the way with the Labour Party, poor old Labour Party. But this idea that the solution to all of Labour's problems lies with some sort of reheated Blairism is just the purest folly,
Right.
with all due respect
Yeah.
to my esteemed fellow columnist in that wonderful newspaper, Truth.
Wayne, that's right. Wayne, the New Zealand Herald editorial, Fran O'Sullivan and David Fry have all come out praising Shearer and claims he needs more time as leader. Should Labour members take advice from the right on who their leader should be?
Of course they should, if they're moving to the right themselves.
Well said, sir.
The fact is, this is the right wing of the business community talking to the right wing of the Labour Party.
Right,
I mean, they're
right.
buddies, these people.
Right.
When I say buddies, I mean
Yep.
they've got a similar view of the world.
Yep.
So those comments are exactly as I would expect. I think what's happening, and we've talked about this on this program before, is that the business community are worried that a combination of the Greens and maybe a Cunliffe-led Labour Party is a little bit more left than it is now, might sort of, upset the apple cart a little bit.
Right.
raise certain economic issues that they don't want raised, like the
Sure.
New Zealand dollar, the Reserve Bank Act, all of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So they're quite happy to have somebody who doesn't have much economic knowledge just steering the ship. Not organising the ship, just steering it. Because Shearer's advisors will be economically literate, and they'll be wanting just a simple policy succession from this government to the
the
right
next
wing
one.
to the
Right.
right wing of the Labour Party.
Right.
Yeah.
Question to both of you. If the caucus trigger threshold is lowered to 40% for the February changeover and how the leader gets elected to mirror the new voting blocks of 40-40-20, will we see a leadership challenge over the summer? Are the barbecues getting ready?
If it comes down to 40%, which would be a real slap in the face to the caucus, if the conference votes for the amendment,
And that's what's
calling,
on, that's
yes,
what's on
calling,
the floor. Yep.
calling for the trigger to be as low as 40, which is still quite high, by the way. I mean, the British trigger is 20%
That's right.
of the caucus. Then I think we can expect to see a summer of plotting and scheming.
Right.
Because I think it's certainly true to say, Wayne, that Phil Goff was anointed. There was, however, an attempt to glean the opinion of the rank and file of the Labour Party when Phil Goff announced his retirement from the leadership. And from what I've heard from numerous sources within the Labour Party, the rank and file went overwhelmingly for David Cunliffe. Now, when
Wash
the
your mouth
caucus,
out with soap and water.
yes, when the caucus then, in a sense, overrode
That's right.
the clearly, signalled support of the rank and file for Mr. Shearer's rival, I think that really drove a bit of iron into the soul of the rank and file of the Labour Party. I think Maura Coatsworth, the president of the party, has really been a very silent but effective advocate for the rank and file, because it's under her presidency, which has been a very low profile one, but nevertheless it's been under her presidency that these changes, which have been sought by the left of the party for decades,
That's right.
have finally come to the floor with every assurance of success.
Will we see a leadership challenge over the summer if the caucus trigger is lowered to 40%?
Look, I think there should be a secret ballot for all party members, just like in the Green Party,
Right.
period.
Right.
And that would solve Labour's problems.
Yeah.
Because this ongoing spat between caucus and the grassroots that Chris has alluded to is a direct result of the lack of democracy within the party. So they've really got to cut the Gordian knot.
Final question to both of you. Are Shearer's odds at being leader of Labour by March the 1st, 2013 have fallen from 90% to just over 51% on I Predict? Is Matthew Hooton being mischievous, or is the market speaking?
You think Matthew Hooton's objective, do you?
Well, we all know that's not the case, but do you think he's being mischievous or the market speaking?
He's been on this program absolutely dissing Cunliffe
That's right.
and praising Shearer to the skies. So any comments that he might make is, look, I think it's getting to a 50-50 proposition, isn't it?
Yep. Is he
Thanks
being
to these
mischievous
vicious
or-
blogs
or
by
thanks
these-
to these vicious blogs.
Martin, after reading Nate Silver, I am very loath to second guess aggregated predictive mechanisms of any sort, and I predict came alarmingly close to predicting the exact result
Yeah,
of the last
yeah,
election.
yeah.
So if Mr. Shearer's only been given 50-50 odds, well, then I believe those are the odds to back.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2. Obama won, and the world now ponders how he will tackle the fiscal cliff and what the next term will produce. Wayne, you've just come back from the US. What were your insights?
Well, the Romney campaign was a debacle.
Why?
First of all, because during their nominating primary, Clint Eastwood spoke to an empty chair. But even before that, the primary candidates, the Santorums of the world, were coming out with so many bizarre positions on a whole raft of policy issues that the Republican Party as a whole was never really on message.
So it wasn't credible candidates.
And also, Romney changed his position on so many issues
Right.
all the way through the year.
Right.
So really, the Republicans weren't singing from the same song sheet, and the Obamaites were.
Right.
So that's your basic reason. There's another just as important reason, and it's called demographics. America's becoming more Hispanic and less white, and the US Republican Party made some very right-wing extreme comments about
On immigration.
self-deporting and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? There's more Hispanics in swing states in America now than there were in the last election.
Right.
And guess what? A lot of those people voted for Obama.
Yeah.
So really they shot themselves in the foot. And then you've got to look at the extreme sexist comments. I've written some of these down.
Yeah.
Todd Aitken, Senator, Republican, Missouri, quote, "A woman's body was able to prevent pregnancy resulting from legitimate rape." Richard Murdoch, Indiana, Republican, "God's will is in force when pregnancy results from rape." Incidentally,
Is that a total lack of biological knowledge?
incidentally,
Or-
they both lost their Senate
yeah,
races.
sure. But I mean, how do you explain those comments? I mean, that's just ludicrous.
How do you explain them? That was the problem for the Republican Party and for Romney, because the women's vote went to Obama, especially in the swing states, but most importantly of all, the younger woman vote went to Obama in spades in the swing states.
Right.
And it was those guys who done it.
Yeah.
So there's other reasons as well, but it's Republican debacle and demographics, if you want two phrases.
Chris, is 4 more years of increased drone strikes better than invading Iran? Walk us through this.
Well, a lot of people have very profound reservations about the use of drones. I must say I don't count myself among them because I think targeted strikes at terrorist leaders is a much less destructive way of waging war against terrorist organisations than launching full-scale invasions of countries that have not attacked you, as George W. Bush did in both Afghanistan and Iraq. And an excellent article, actually, in the New York Times looked at this whole question of the drone strikes and went into some detail as to how both Obama and his counter-terrorism advisor pored over the information and were actually very careful about how they used this weapon. Although I think it is true that when you use a weapon like this, you've always got to think, okay, at the moment it's in the hands of a reasonable and rational and responsible human being. What if it wasn't? And I think that's where the argument against drone strikes comes in.
Does though a democracy is always held back from waging war because the casualties and voters don't like seeing their children come home in coffins. If you've roboticized that and you don't risk any casualties, aren't you much more prone to just going on with an endless war, open-ended war with drones?
Well, I mean, that's the argument that people put forward, of course. You know, once you've taken out the terrorist commander, what happens? Does everybody in the terrorist organisation then move up a notch?
That's right,
So that, you know, suddenly the driver of the car becomes a target. I mean, that's a fairly good argument. But leaving aside the drones and leaving aside the reduced likelihood of a war with Iran now that Obama has returned.
And you would say it's reduced?
Oh yes, I think so.
Right.
I think so.
The Israelis won't.
The Israelis seem to have turned their guns now towards Gaza rather than
Sadly.
Iran. But you know, I think Obama now has to really decide what he's going to do with the last 4 years of his time as president. Is he going to continue to try and meet in the middle, as he has done, you know, previously, or is he, as I think he hinted in that acceptance speech that he gave on election night, is he going to call those Americans who voted for him back into the straps, as it were, to defeat a House of Representatives which is only in the hands of the Republicans because of gerrymandered congressional district boundaries, and which is, in spite of the country having spoken in an election, still determined to resist all plans to produce some kind of fiscal resolution of America's economic difficulties. If he calls the majority that he now has assembled, you know, back into play, as it were, through rallies or demonstrations or whatever, you know, suits his purpose best. It could be as easy as just millions of emails being sent to congressmen.
Yeah.
But however he chooses to use those supporters, I mean, I think it is time that he took that route. The alternative is for the Republican-dominated House of Representatives to simply blackmail all the other branches of the American government indefinitely. In other words, holding the whole of the American economy to ransom to get their own way.
Wayne, what do the Republicans do now? Where do they rebuild?
Well, before I answer that question, I just want to sort of calm down all the euphoria of Obama's election.
Yeah.
There's a couple of really serious issues that came up in the first term, and they don't look like they're going to be addressed in the second term either.
Yep.
I spoke to activists in the US, and this is the Homeland Security Act and the Patriot Act, and Obama has strengthened those acts, right? So warrantless wiretapping is easier now than what it was under Bush.
Yeah.
And under a piece of legislation that was passed in December 2011, you can be rounded up and detained and re-inditioned in your own country, even though you're an American citizen. This happened under Obama's watch, and this is serious because what it shows is that the unaccountable elements of American power structures are becoming more and more powerful, and it shows you that the division of powers, which the American Constitution is based on, is in permanent decline, irrespective of who is the president. So I just want to mention that. Where are the Republicans at? Well, they've actually got to start from the ground up because the demographics are against them. They can't be an old white man's party and expect to win anymore. They will win Senate and congressional races because at that level, vicious political attack advertising does in fact work. It doesn't work so well at a high federal level for presidential elections. They will have their rump, but they'll have to suddenly rethink where they are at and become more diverse in their organisation. And they're going to need some charismatic Hispanic candidates coming up through the ranks. Because after all, a lot of Hispanic voters also are quite conservative.
So
it shouldn't be too difficult
George
for them to do
Bush's
that.
great line, family values go beyond the Rio Grande, right?
Yeah, but as they now stand, they're in disarray and Romney won't be back.
Final question to both of you on this issue. What do you predict will happen with the fiscal cliff?
Well, I think the president is going to have to
steer them down.
Yes, steer them down, and as I say, call back into operational mode, as it were, that huge force that he mustered to win the presidency, to persuade, using inverted commas, the Republicans that they simply will not be allowed to hold the American economy and the American public to ransom as they did in the last 4 years.
What do you think? Dow's down 1,000 points since Obama won. The money men aren't all that happy he's back in power. How is he going to deal with the fiscal cliff?
I think he's in a stronger position than he was a few years ago. Things have changed a little bit in the US over this big government thing. First of all, you had Hurricane Sandy. And how are you going to rebuild seawalls without big government? That's number one. Number two, the educational issue in the US is really big now. It may have passed people's notice, but during that presidential election in California, there was a ballot initiative to increase tax revenue by $6 billion, and a lot of that money is going to schools, and elementary schools and universities, because a lot of Californians are really worried that tax cuts and contracting government is undermining their education in relation to China and India, and that's a huge issue. So if Obama plays that kind of card, like balancing off investment in education against, okay, we do need to tax these higher income people so we can do that, I think rhetorically and ethically, he's going to be in a stronger position than he was a year or two ago.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3, when Paula Bennett wheeled her draconian welfare reforms out that would see beneficiaries being stripped of 50% of their benefit, she promised it wouldn't punish the children of beneficiaries. Well, CPAG have, under the Official Information Act, gained numbers from work and income showing within 1 year that 363 beneficiaries with dependent children have had their benefits cut under Paula Bennett. Very quick question to both of you on this. How does cutting a benefit by 50% help the children of those 363 beneficiaries, Chris?
Well, obviously it doesn't. It increases the level of hardship. It's part of a model which I'm afraid to say that Labor pioneered, Ruth Dyson in particular, when she was the Minister of Social Welfare. This idea that you have to have an incentive to get people looking for work, get them out there, as Paula would say. And of course, this is the only sanction available. You cut the income to someone who already is jobless and is trying to raise children on limited funds. It makes no sense. It's cruelty, really.
What's the impact of this going to be? I mean, we know the child poverty issues in this country. We know that inequality is at a historic high. Cutting people's benefits by 50%, how's that going to help those kids?
An identical passage of events in the United Kingdom. I was there for a couple of weeks.
Yep.
The Tories are playing exactly the same game. As I've said in this program before, it's stigmatisation. It's playing off taxpayers against beneficiaries. The point is that you do punish beneficiaries and you do demonise them in order to make them so-called responsible for their own misfortune. And if Middle New Zealand can buy into that, then we don't really need to help them at all, do we?
Right. Okay, let's wrap the show with final word. Chris, your final word this week is?
Well, I'm just looking at the proposal to build a multi-storey brothel in the heart of the Auckland Central Business District. And I look back and examine my own attitudes towards the legalisation of prostitution several years ago now. I was in favour of it then. New Zealand at that point was facing the same kind of questions that Sweden faced at roughly the same time. The Swedes took the other direction. Rather than decriminalising prostitution, they said, this is a very bad thing. It's bound up with despair, with misery, with drug addiction, with criminality, gangsterism, all of these things. So we are really going to make a serious effort to stop it. And I am very rapidly coming round to the position that, that the Swedes adopted, that this is not something which should be sanctioned in society. And I think a multi-storied brothel in the heart of Auckland will actually shake a few people's, perhaps complacent views on prostitution.
Wayne, your final word this week?
Well, I've been out of the country for 6 weeks, so I fly from LA to Auckland on Air New Zealand, go into my seat feeling a little homesick, and what do I see on the Air New Zealand safety video? A whole lot of Air New Zealand staff dressed up as hobbits. And a little goblin running along the floor pointing out all the emergency lights and where the emergency door is. Give me a break. Where are the brown faces? Where is New Zealand identity? This is how far we've come since 1840. Absolutely appalling. An Aryan fantasy masquerading as national identity signed off by Warner Brothers based on a book written by some loopy Don from Warwickshire. I mean, what the bee is this all about? I despair of this country
It's
sometimes.
so good having you back, Wayne. It's so good having you back. Thank Lord. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. Look, over the last week, I've been detailing the intimidation by police and death of Stephen McIntyre on the Tumiki blog. Stephen was a medical cannabis activist who was arrested on June 22nd at a cannabis dispensary called Green Cross, just across the road from Auckland Hospital. Stephen was looking forward to the court case until he was intimidated and threatened at his home at night on July the 16th by the police. They claimed they were checking his bail conditions, claimed they could smell marijuana, and that they only wanted to know who his lawyer was. In Stephen's transcript of events, however, he claimed they wanted to know how he was pleading, threatening to press more charges if he made the case into an issue, and claimed they could smell marijuana at his home. There were 7 other eyewitnesses on the night who attested there was no marijuana being smoked. His family point out there was no curfew and no bail conditions attached to him, and that Stephen's lawyer had represented Stephen in court and had contacted the police twice in regards to the case. Every explanation of what the police were really doing at Stephen's home on the 16th of July had been proved questionable. Less than a week after the police intimidation at his home, Stephen was dead, with his family pointing to the intimidation as a catalyst. Do we really want a police force turning up at night at our homes, asking how you're going to plead and threatening more charges if you plead innocence? This example and numerous others currently in the media suggest a police force out of control and drunk on their own power. The irony is that America cannabis reform is at its highest level, while in New Zealand activists are being bullied into death. There needs to be an independent investigation into police actions, and it needs to be done now. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.